The hotel reservation appeared on my laptop screen by accident. Yet the moment I saw it, I felt as though I had stumbled into a part of my husband's life that I was never supposed to see. Adrian had borrowed my computer earlier that afternoon because his laptop had frozen during an online meeting. When I opened my email later that evening, his account was still logged in. I had no intention of looking through his messages, but a confirmation email near the top of the screen immediately caught my attention. At first, I thought it was a work trip. Then I opened the email. The reservation was for a small hotel near the coast. It was booked for 2 nights and scheduled during the same weekend as our wedding anniversary. As I continued reading, my stomach tightened. The booking listed only one guest, and that guest was Adrian Cole. I read the details several times, hoping I had misunderstood something. Adrian and I had been married for 8 years, and during that time, we had never hidden travel plans from each other. Even when work required him to leave town unexpectedly, he always mentioned it in advance. This reservation felt different because there was no explanation attached to it. There was only a room, a date, and a growing sense that something was wrong. My name is Alara Bennett, and until recently, I believed my marriage was built on honesty. We were not the kind of couple who constantly talked about romance or posted perfect photographs online, but we had always been partners. At least, that was what I thought. Looking back now, I can see that the problems began long before I discovered that email. For nearly a year, Adrian had been drifting away from me in ways that were difficult to describe. He worked as a project manager for a construction company, and his responsibilities had increased significantly. New projects seemed to appear every month, and his phone never stopped ringing. At first, I accepted the changes because I understood the demands of his job. However, over time, work stopped feeling like an explanation and started feeling like a wall between us. Most evenings followed the same pattern. Adrian returned home late, greeted me politely, and spent the rest of the night answering emails or reviewing reports. Even when we sat together on the couch, his attention rarely stayed in the room. Sometimes I would tell him a story about my day, and he would nod without remembering a single detail a few minutes later. One evening, after he spent 20 minutes staring at his phone during dinner, I finally put down my fork and looked at him. "Do you even know what I just said?" I asked. Adrian blinked and lowered his phone. "Of course I do." I waited. What did I say? A brief silence followed. "You were talking about work." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Adrian, I was talking about Nina getting engaged." He rubbed his forehead and looked genuinely embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Alara. It's been a long day." The apology sounded sincere, but something inside me felt tired. Long days had become the answer to everything. A few weeks later, I started keeping a journal. I told myself it was simply a way to organize my thoughts, but the truth was more complicated. I was trying to understand why I felt lonely inside my own marriage. As the pages filled, a pattern began to emerge. Adrian forgot plans. Adrian canceled weekends. Adrian avoided serious conversations. Adrian seemed emotionally exhausted. Individually, these moments looked harmless. Together, they painted a picture I did not want to see. One afternoon, I met my friend Nina for coffee. She listened patiently while I described the growing distance between Adrian and me. After nearly 20 minutes, she asked a question that completely caught me off guard. "Do you think he's happy?" I opened my mouth to answer immediately, but no words came out. The question stayed with me for the rest of the day because I realized I no longer knew. I knew Adrian's schedule, his responsibilities, and his daily routine. Yet I could not describe what he was feeling. That realization frightened me more than I expected. As our anniversary approached, I became determined to reconnect with him. I booked a table at the restaurant where we celebrated our engagement years earlier. I ordered a custom photo album filled with pictures from our relationship and arranged my schedule so I could spend the entire weekend with him. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. I convinced myself that we simply needed time together. The night of our anniversary arrived, and I arrived at the restaurant 30 minutes early because I was excited. The photo album sat inside my bag, carefully wrapped in silver paper. Around me, couples laughed over candlelit dinners while soft music played in the background. At 7 o'clock, Adrian had not arrived. At 7:15, I checked my phone. At 7:30, I ordered water and told myself traffic was probably the problem. By 8 o'clock, the waiter had stopped pretending not to feel sorry for me. Finally, my phone rang. "Ilara, I'm so sorry," Adrian said. The noise of a busy office echoed behind him. "Where are you?" I asked quietly. A long pause followed. Then he answered, "I forgot." For a moment, I genuinely thought I had heard him incorrectly. "You forgot our anniversary?" "I've been dealing with a project crisis all day." Everything became chaotic. I closed my eyes. "Adrian, I've been sitting here alone for an hour." "I know. I'm sorry." His voice sounded exhausted. Mine sounded broken. "Do you even want to be here?" Another silence followed. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. When he finally spoke, his answer changed something inside me. "I don't know." The line went quiet. Neither of us said anything. For the first time in 8 years, I felt like I was speaking to a stranger. I left the restaurant shortly afterward and drove home with the unopened photo album beside me. The following afternoon, while trying to understand what had happened, I discovered the hotel reservation on my laptop. Later that evening, I noticed something else. Adrian had left his office door partially open while taking a shower. As I walked past the room, I saw his computer screen glowing in the darkness. A calendar reminder was visible on the monitor. The reminder was for the Coastal Hotel. Nothing else appeared on that weekend. No anniversary plans. No dinner reservations. No mention of me. As I stood there staring at the screen, a painful realization settled over me. The reservation did not look like the beginning of a secret affair. It looked like something far more troubling. It looked like the plan of a man who wanted to disappear from his own life, even if only for a few days. And for the first time, I began wondering whether Adrian was not running towards someone else. I began wondering whether he was running away from us. Before I share the rest of story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. For the next several days, I carried the memory of that restaurant conversation with me everywhere I went. The image of an empty chair across the table replayed in my mind far more often than I wanted to admit. Before that evening, I had been worried about the growing distance between Adrian and me. After hearing him say, "I don't know," when I asked whether he wanted to be there, worry turned into something much heavier. The hotel reservation only made that feeling worse. I wanted to confront him immediately, but I stopped myself. Part of me still hoped there was an explanation I had not considered. Perhaps he was overwhelmed. Perhaps he needed time alone. Perhaps I was connecting unrelated events because I was hurt and emotional. Unfortunately, every passing day seemed to support the same conclusion. Adrian became quieter than ever. When he came home from work, he often sat alone in the living room, with a notebook resting on his lap. Sometimes he wrote for several minutes before closing it and staring silently through the window. Other times, he would simply hold a pen without writing anything at all. One evening, I walked into the room carrying 2 cups of tea and placed one beside him. "You've been doing that a lot lately," I said. Adrian looked down at the notebook. "Doing what?" "Thinking." A faint smile appeared on his face. "Everyone thinks. You know what I mean." His smile disappeared almost immediately. For a moment, he looked as though he wanted to say something important. Instead, he thanked me for the tea and changed the subject. The conversation ended the same way so many of our conversations had ended over the previous year. We came close to honesty, but never quite reached it. As the anniversary weekend approached, the atmosphere inside our apartment became increasingly uncomfortable. Neither of us mentioned the reservation. Neither of us discussed the future. We moved carefully around each other like people trying to avoid a difficult truth. The morning Adrian left for the coast arrived sooner than I expected. He packed a small travel bag and placed it near the front door while I stood in the kitchen pretending to focus on breakfast. The silence between us felt impossible to ignore. Finally, I set down my coffee cup. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" I asked. Adrian looked at me for several seconds before answering. "I don't know how to explain what I'm feeling." "Then try." His shoulders dropped slightly. "I'm tired, Alara. Everyone gets tired. This is different." I waited for him to continue. Instead, he picked up his bag. "I'll be back on Monday." Those words frustrated me more than I expected. I wasn't asking when you'll be back. His expression softened. "I know." Then he walked out the door. For nearly an hour after he left, I sat alone in the apartment trying to decide what to do. Every logical part of me said I should stay home. Following him felt irrational and invasive. However, another part of me needed answers. For months, I had watched my marriage slowly disappear without understanding why. By early afternoon, I was driving toward the coast. The hotel was located near a quiet beach several hours from the city. Instead of checking into the same hotel, I rented a room at a small guest house nearby. My plan was simple. I wanted to understand what Adrian was searching for. What I discovered surprised me. The man I observed over the next 2 days did not look like someone escaping with another woman. He looked like someone struggling to understand himself. That evening, I watched him walk alone along the shoreline. The beach was nearly empty except for a few tourists taking photographs of the sunset. Adrian carried the same notebook I had seen so many times at home. He eventually sat on a weathered wooden bench overlooking the ocean and began writing. The sight should have made me angry. Instead, it made me sad. There was something about the way he sat there that felt deeply lonely. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and his attention remained fixed on the horizon for long periods before he wrote another sentence. The following morning, I saw him again. The sky was gray, and a strong wind moved across the water. Adrian stood alone near the edge of the beach, staring at the waves. After several minutes, He reached into his jacket pocket and removed something. It was an old photograph. Even from a distance, I recognized it immediately. It was one of our wedding pictures. For a long time, he simply looked at it. Then he sat down on a nearby rock and lowered his head into his hands. In 8 years of marriage, I had never seen Adrian cry. Yet in that moment, there was no doubt about what I was witnessing. The sight stayed with me for the rest of the day. That evening, I finally approached him. He was sitting on the same bench with his notebook resting beside him when I walked toward him. The surprise on his face was immediate. "Ilara? I think we need to stop avoiding this conversation." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Adrian nodded. The discussion that followed lasted for hours. For the first time in years, he spoke honestly about his fears, his exhaustion, and the growing emptiness he had been carrying inside. He admitted that he no longer recognized himself, and that work had become a way to avoid problems he did not know how to solve. Near the end of the conversation, he revealed the truth he had been trying to understand during the trip. He had booked the hotel because he needed distance from his routine, his responsibilities, and even from our marriage. He hoped that time alone would provide clarity. Unfortunately, the answer he found frightened him, because after 2 days of reflection, he still did not know whether he wanted to continue the life we had built together. As I listened to those words, I realized something painful. For months, I had been trying to repair a relationship that Adrian was no longer sure he wanted to save, and no amount of love or effort could remove that uncertainty for him. The drive back from the coast felt much longer than the journey there. Adrian and I spent most of the trip in silence, and neither of us seemed eager to fill it. We had finally spoken honestly after months of avoidance, yet the truth had not brought us closer together. If anything, it had forced us to acknowledge how far apart we had already become. When we returned to the apartment, life continued much as it always had. We went to work, completed our responsibilities, and shared the same space. However, something inside me had changed. For months, I had treated our marriage like a problem that could be solved if I worked hard enough. I believed that better communication, more patience, or greater understanding would eventually repair the damage. After the conversation at the coast, I realized that relationships cannot survive on determination alone. Both people must want the same future, and Adrian was no longer certain that he did. At first, accepting that reality was incredibly painful. Every morning I woke up hoping he would suddenly have an answer. Every evening, I searched his face for signs that he had made a decision. Yet the more I waited, the more exhausted I became. Eventually, I understood that I had built my entire emotional world around a question that only Adrian could answer. That realization forced me to make a choice. If I could not control his decision, I needed to stop allowing it to control my life. The change began with small steps. I joined a creative writing workshop that met every Thursday evening. Writing had once been an important part of my life, but I had gradually abandoned it as work and responsibilities consumed my attention. Sitting in a room filled with people sharing ideas and stories reminded me that there was still a world beyond the problems waiting for me at home. As the weeks passed, other changes followed naturally. I spent more time with friends, exercised regularly, and started exploring interests that had nothing to do with my marriage. None of these decisions felt dramatic in the moment. However, together they helped me rediscover parts of myself that I had neglected for years. One evening after a workshop, Nina looked at me and smiled. "You seem different," she said. I laughed softly. "Different how? You don't look like someone waiting anymore." Her observation stayed with me because it was true. For a very long time, I had been waiting. I waited for Adrian to come home. I waited for him to open up. I waited for him to choose us. Somewhere along the way, I stopped building my own future and focused entirely on preserving the one we already had. Months passed, and Adrian began noticing the changes as well. He started asking questions about my writing projects. He became more interested in my daily life and occasionally suggested spending time together. The irony was impossible to ignore. When I stopped chasing his attention, he seemed more willing to offer it. One evening, nearly 6 months after the trip to the coast, Adrian asked if we could take a walk together. We ended up at a riverside park not far from our apartment. The weather was cool, and the city lights reflected across the water in long, shimmering patterns. For a while, we walked without speaking. Eventually, Adrian broke the silence. "I owe you an apology," he said. I looked at him but said nothing. I spent so much time trying to understand myself that I stopped thinking about what all of this was doing to you. His voice sounded sincere. "I know I hurt you." I nodded slowly. "Yes, you did." He looked down at the path beneath our feet. I thought leaving for that weekend would help me find answers. Instead, it showed me how much I had been running away from my problems. For the next several minutes, Adrian spoke more honestly than I had heard in years. He admitted that work had become an escape. He admitted that he had withdrawn emotionally instead of communicating openly. Most importantly, he admitted that he regretted allowing our relationship to reach that point. Then he stopped walking. When I turned toward him, I saw a nervous expression I had not seen since the early days of our relationship. "I want another chance, Alara," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve one, but I want to try." For a moment, I simply stood there. 6 months earlier, those words would have meant everything to me. They were exactly what I had hoped to hear during countless sleepless nights. I had imagined this conversation so many times that it almost felt familiar. The difference was that I was no longer the same person. The months of uncertainty, heartbreak, and personal growth had changed me in ways I never expected. I still cared about Adrian deeply, and part of me probably always would. However, I could not ignore one simple truth. He became certain about us only after I learned how to live without him. "I believe you're being honest," I said gently, "but I don't think I can build my future around a relationship that survived only after it nearly ended." Pain flashed across his face, but he nodded. Deep down, I think he already understood. Several months later, I moved into a small apartment across the city. It was not luxurious, but it felt peaceful. The space reflected the life I was creating for myself, rather than the life I had spent years trying to protect. One evening, while organizing old files on my laptop, I found the hotel reservation email again. For a moment, I stared at the screen and remembered how devastated I felt when I first discovered it. Back then, I believed the reservation marked the beginning of the end. Looking back, I saw it differently. The room by the coast had never been the real problem. The distance between Adrian and me had been growing for much longer than either of us wanted to admit. That weekend simply forced us to confront a reality we had both been avoiding. As I deleted the email, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. peace. I was no longer searching for explanations, wishing for different choices, or holding on to a version of the future that no longer existed. Sometimes courage means fighting for the people you love. Other times, courage means accepting the truth, letting go with dignity, and giving yourself permission to begin again. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.